Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started. Good morning again, everyone. It's Rod Johnston with Omni Practice Group, as well as Megan Urban from Omni Practice Group as well. Megan works down in Oregon. She handles all the Oregon market as well as Southern Washington. So her and I are gonna be doing this webinar together. Megan's gonna lead the discussion, and then I'll talk as well on some of the topics as we need. The presentation will be about an hour long. There's a chat or a Q&A button. If you haven't done Zoom before, you can click on the Q&A and ask any questions that you'd like, and then we'll get to them. I already see one question in there. So we'll get to the questions probably towards the end of the webinar. And you can also email us. There's a contact information at the end as well. Email us with questions. So today we're going to cover quite a few topics about dental practice transitions. We'll discuss how COVID's affected some of the different things, the values, as well as the buyers and those types of things. So it's going to be a soup to nuts webinar on everything you know, from preparing your practice to sell all the way to thinking about what you're going to do after you sell the practice. So let's see. Megan, I think you've got control, so can you scroll to the next slide? There we go. About Omni, many of you have heard about us before. I founded Omni in 2004. I started out in Washington. We predominantly were initially in Washington, and we moved into Oregon, started doing practices in Arizona, California, Hawaii, Alaska. We seem to add a few locations every year. It's primarily from demand. Just doctors will call us from other states and ask us to help them out, so we just keep adding more states. Our brokers within our group, there's about 8 or 9 of us now. They range from CPAs to former dentists to consultants to office managers. We have a spectrum, which makes it kind of nice for our group. We take a team approach. If there's a question revolving around taxes, we can call one of our CPAs. If there's a question around any clinical questions, we can rely on our dentists in our group. And if there's office management questions, system, Dentrix, EagleSoft questions, we have all the resources within our company to do that. We don't have to go outside, so that makes it really convenient. We're accredited business appraisers. I went through the course myself. It takes about 6 weeks and several tests, and you have to submit some of your valuations to a group that evaluates your valuations. And then they give you the thumbs up, and then you have to do continuing education every year. So it's unlike other brokers who just give you a rule of thumb valuation. We do the full valuation. We're also licensed real estate brokers, which some states require that by law, others don't. If you're going to be selling real estate with your practice, it definitely needs to be done. If not, then it doesn't necessarily have to happen, but most states do require it. We're also members of the National Association of Practice Brokers. I was the past president and just turned that over to another broker in December. So fully involved with them, and it's a group of about 40 brokerages across the United States, and we have monthly calls, and it's a great resource for us if we have questions on everything from valuing a sleep apnea practice to, hey, this happened, what do I do? And it's a great to have some support there. Other thing we do a little differently is we're very personalized. When we work with you, we go into your office and do a lot of the work ourselves. That's why you hired us, is to be there and to show the practice. We don't ask you to show the practice this Sunday when the Super Bowl is going on. We'll be doing that. So in fact, I have an appointment this Sunday, so I got to figure out how to work around that. Megan joined us about 4 or 5 years ago. Well, actually, she had originally been with us way back when, and she rejoined us a few years ago. She has 25 years in the dental industry. Her dad was a dentist, so she really was born into it. So she probably has a ton of experience, anything from being a dental assistant to managing a group, being the regional manager. She's done consulting. She worked for a CPA firm in Salem. She lives in Salem, so she's helped a lot of practices grow and sell. So if you're preparing to sell your practice a few years beforehand, she's a great resource for that. And she's also great resources for buyers as well, and also does associate placement. My background's accounting and finance. I was the former assistant treasurer for AT&T Wireless. Like I said, I founded Omni about 16 years ago. I've done some expert witness on valuations and some transactions and lots of stories. I think I've been involved in 300 to 400, I lost track, transitions or valuations, or either buy side, sell side, or the valuation side. So got a lot of experience, and I've done dental consulting as well. So, and today, as I stated, we're going to cover a lot of different topics, everything from soup to nuts, beginning to end. So, a transition, it can be as complicated as you want it to be, or we try to make things as simple. We take all of the work away from the doctors and do a lot of it ourselves, because it can be a little bit overwhelming. On average, we've tracked how long it takes to get a practice sold, from the time it takes to start pulling documents and meeting with the doctor, to taking the phone calls, to putting a marketing package together, to showing the practice, to putting the letter of intent together, all the different things. It takes about 200 hours on average to get a practice sold. And it can take longer. We've had some take 400 or 500 hours. So, as we go through this, feel free, and I already see 4 questions. That's awesome in the Q&A section. So feel free to keep them coming and we'll answer them, and I'll kind of scroll through them as we talk. So from here, I'm gonna let Megan take it away.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm sure there's lots of concerns as a seller. I mean, some of the ones we hear are just in general fear. You've been doing something for 20, 30, 40 plus years, and now all of a sudden you're changing. But it can be obviously the next step into your next adventure. And a lot of times, like with what do I do now and retirement plan, I think a lot of that you need to talk with your CPA and your financial planner and say, hey, can I truly retire? And if I do, what do I do with the funds from my sale? Does my retirement plan allow me to sock a bunch of that away? You also have to remember that, if you do owe anything on your practice or your real estate, that is paid off at the closing. So you need to remember that too. But it is a time to plan to say, hey, what do I want to do? What exciting things do I want to do? Rather than just making it a stressful situation. Rod, my arrow button's not working here, sorry.
Let's see here. Oh, there it goes.
So one thing to think, I know a lot of the things that the sellers always, I feel like, is the first thing they think about is, how is a buyer going to really afford my practice? And they do. There are many banks, or a handful or more that we work with on a regular basis, that understand dentistry. And so they understand that buyers have student debt and potentially credit card debt and all that. And so they understand that, and they're still able to help them buy the practice. But for the buyers, of course, they're concerned about what they don't know. And, can they really afford it? Can they do what you do? Can they retain all the patients? I think a big, not a concern, but something that they are excited to actually think about is there anything else I can do to increase the practice? Like if the seller refers out a lot of endo or a lot of oral surgery, maybe the new young buyer does a lot of that. So that's something that they definitely look at. But typically, Buyers just need to have their school debt and their debt detail together so that the bank has that. But again, dental specific lenders, which we always recommend, understand dentistry and they understand, you know, their debt that they have.
I'm trying to forward it. It's not. Let me see if I can just stop the remote control here.
That's all right. We don't need the slides, for Pete's sake.
No,
Lots of times when we're at an actual seminar with so many questions with a live audience, we don't even get through the slides anyway. So this is fine. One of the next things that I think, oh, well, all right then. How long will it take? You know, that's always the one never knows. I've had some practices that before a buyer has even really seen it, they know it's an area and type they like, and I'll have 4 letters of intent and only 3 of those people have even seen the practice. Now I have other practices that, you know, the dentist is taking home $800,000 a year and, you know, working maybe 4 days a week and has this really robust, great practice, and it's in an area where people don't want to live. So how long will it take? It's always a good question, but it does depend. I mean, right now we see in some ways the trend has always been urban. You know, people want to live in Seattle or Portland, but I'm kind of finding that there's, are you finding that too, Rod, that people do want to live at the coast and maybe in some smaller towns? I'm seeing that a little bit more.
Yeah, we're getting more and more doctors getting out of the metropolitan areas. In fact, I was talking to a dentist in a small town, Eastern Washington. He said, yeah, we're getting all kinds of people moving to the outskirts. So they're getting out of the metropolitan areas. That doesn't mean that their metropolitan area practices won't sell. It's just that there's more and more moving out.
Yeah, a little bit of a change, not even a huge change that I'm seeing. The facility matters. Although we all know that you can change a facility, but not everybody has that imagination or, you know, has the patience to want to deal with that. Typically, I find that most dentists want at least 4 operatories. Now, we know that 3 operatories can be very productive, but, you know, that's still how a lot of new young dentists feel, is that they want at least 4 operatories. It can matter on how long it takes too, depending on the cash flow. Sometimes we've got some that are doing, you know, a ton of cash flow, and they obviously sell a little bit quicker. Some that don't have as much cash flow, it's a little bit harder because, you know, sometimes the seller says, hey, I've been working here for 30 years and I collected X dollars. Well, but then when you look through it, you know, they're really not taking much money home. I had one and it was $50,000 a year. Well, most buyers can't come in and pay their debt and work and take home $50,000 a year. One big thing on both sides is that you have your dental specific advisors around you. A team is super critical. Every decision is yours to make, but I can tell you in my experience, people who have attorneys and CPAs that are relatives and patients and neighbors and friends, they don't know what they don't know. And so I think it's super critical to truly work with a dental specific advisor. But the seller does initiate, which is a little bit different than in some real estate and business. So the seller's attorney does write up the documents. So as you can see, we typically suggest that you work with your financial planner or CPA, your broker, obviously, and an attorney. And we're happy to recommend, you know, the dental specific ones that we work with and that we know do a great job. And obviously, if you have a spouse or family, you know, it's important that they're potentially involved too, so that you guys are making the right steps and making the right decisions for your family.
Hey, my computer, I apologize. My computer's like taking 20 seconds before it switches screens. Or longer.
Well, maybe this is a good time to take a couple of questions, Rod.
Sure, yeah. There's some in the Q&A right there. I don't know if you can see those.
Oh.
You know, do I really need a dental specific attorney is the first question.
Yes, we actually just talked about that. You do want to work with a dental specific attorney. We can talk more about that if you like, but it's definitely, I've got plenty of story on why that's super critical. Selecting a broker. I think lots of times it's important to have a broker that you just seem to get along with, just like a lender or an attorney. You know, hopefully you can show and we can prove that we know our stuff, but who do you feel like you want to work with? Because sometimes I'm talking with my clients every day or multiple times a day, maybe not once a week. But you can definitely always, when you're selecting a broker or an advisor, is to request references, ask what exactly they're going to do for you. For instance, we have like even a closing checklist. And I think it's really nice so that buyers and sellers have something in front of them that even though we talk about things, there's so many things we talk about, it's easy to forget. And so it's like, let's just walk through this literal checklist together to put your mind at ease. And so part of that too is just what's the timeline as far as what happens next. Some things have to happen all at the same time, but what are the fees involved with selling your practice? And if you have real estate, a condo or a building, you know, what are the fees involved with selling that? How available we are, how we market. Do we get into some of that later? I guess we do, Rod, right?
Yeah, we do.
Okay. And experience, background, quarterback, who's going to help you get over the finish line there. Typically, I guess, you know, with this whole webinar today, you know, there's always, every practice is completely different. And so in general, here's typically what happens. You know, we come to your office, meet you, sometimes the spouse is there, just learn about what you've loved about your practice, what your goals are. Obviously, we're going to take pictures, you know, go over potentially at that point, we may have the valuation done and we're going to go through that with you. And just the whole idea of, in general, how does it work? And what are you going to do next? I guess just to pop real quick on the emotional aspect, one of the last dentists that I did do a transition with, and he was sending me in a testimonial, and he really hit on the emotional part a lot. I mean, that was the biggest part to him, is that he really didn't think it was going to be so emotionally stressful for him in some ways that I don't even think he could discuss, you know, really put in detail and in words. But, you know, he was just so appreciative that I could, you know, I would talk to him whenever he needed to talk. So I know that ends up being a much bigger deal than probably we all think. So blueprint for your practice, treatment plan, your appraiser, all your, you know, trusted advisors, you know, that's what's really important, because the next thing we need to do is do the valuation. And so it's important that we have the right information, and the sooner we get it, the sooner we can figure everything out and help you. Some folks a lot at first and some don't, but we try to make it super simple. So a lot of it is, you know, we send you a simple form that says, here's all the reports we want from your dental software system. And hopefully it's the things that you're looking at on a regular basis. The practice statistics might be, you know, your accounts receivable aging, your number of new patients, production, collections, adjustments, all that type of thing. We're going to also want your fixed assets, so your equipment. And a lot of times you can find that on your personal property tax return. And you can kind of review that and make sure that's up to date, because we'll need to know, do you have a CBCT? Do you have a Pano? Do you have ADEC chairs? How old are they? What's available to the new buyer, and what kind of price are we going to put on that? We'll also get financials. Again, practice statistics from your dental software, but then the financials from your dental accounting system. So financials as far as annual profit and loss statements, and then the associated tax returns. The easiest way to get those is just to literally call your CPA and say, can you electronically send these last 3 years of financials to my broker? That would be fabulous. We look at the practice profile, which is just, hey, how long have you been there? Did you buy it from someone else? How long, what's the history of the practice? We look at floor plans. You want to make sure that you've got all your state, X-ray, units certified, and all that's in line. We look at, like I was mentioning, active patient count, new patient count. Where do your patients come from? Do they come from your zip code or somewhere else? We look at the insurance participation that you have. There isn't a right or wrong answer to any of these things. We just need to know what you have so that the buyer understands what they're buying and goes in with their eyes wide open. And we look at whether you lease or own your space. If you lease it, we're going to want to look at when the lease expires and what the options are for renewing. We'll want to look at any professional contacts you have and get all that information together to, again, put together a really detailed type valuation for you.
Yeah, I think an important one there, Megan, to point out is the lease. If you haven't looked at your lease in the last, well, since you signed it 10 years ago, you might want to take a look at it, because there might be some clauses in there that, a quick story is we had a practice that locally here near our office in Seattle wanted to sell his practice, and he was doing close to $1 million. We went to sell his practice, and his lease was up within like 8 months. And we went to the landlord to get an extension, and he said, no, I'm not renewing the lease. We're tearing the building down, as soon as the leases are up. So he's just like, you'll go month to month. And long story short, we couldn't sell the practice because the building was going to be torn down. So make sure you look at your lease before you, or at least let us look at it.
Yeah, exactly. Dig that thing out.
Yep.
So again, we're going to want to look at everything about your employees. How many do you have hired? How often do they work? What are they paid? What benefits do they have? So that, again, they can look at what have they been getting, and, might the new buyer be able to take on. On the financials, we typically look at the last 3 years. And what we want to look at is if there's any personal expenses. Oftentimes, although again, it's like everything, it's across the board. You never know what you're going to find. But sometimes a lot of dentists run personal expenses through there. Like they may own several buildings on that block, and they'll run all the utilities through their dental office. Some dentists put cars on their books, and spouses' cars on the books. And kids that need tuition, they put them on as employees. All that's fine. We just need to know so that we can back that out of your cash flow so that the buyer understands truly what the cash flow would be to them. So we take out all those personal expenses. We also look at the accounts receivable aging report. They want to know how much is current, how much is really old. A couple of reasons, I think, as the buyer, they want to know if the patients are used to paying on time and at the time of service. But if they're not, that's fine. But what do they want to change slowly over time? And the accounts receivable also, as it ages out, you're not going to get, if it's current, you're going to get paid $1 for $1. But as it ages out, they're paying you less on the dollar. There's typically an option of the buyer buys the accounts receivable, or you as seller keeps it and collects it themselves. And typically what that looks like is the new buyer does collect it, but keeps, I don't know, what is it, Rod, like 6%, 8% of it as
about 6%.
6 as a fee. So there's not a right or wrong answer, but that's something that, you know, we definitely want to look at and put in, because it, you know, if they have a clear accounts receivable, it can be just working capital almost for you until you have your insurance money coming in. Again, on the appraisal and valuation, we definitely look at the inventory and your furniture and all the consumables that you have. I mean, we don't want you buying a whole bunch extra before you leave, because that doesn't make sense, but you also can't let it dwindle to nothing so that then the new buyer comes in and they can't work. So we want to look at all those things and get a little of that information from you too.
Peter doesn't like me this morning. It's
I know it's strange. I don't think I've ever had this issue, but
no.
There's always a first time, right?
I'm hitting the next slide and it's not going.
Let me look at the Q&A while you're working on that, Rod.
Okay.
So let's see, the next one, it says, should I update the look of the office prior to selling? Well, it depends. If, you know, you have the green check carpet in the operatories, yes, please update that. But, and you know, if you have weeds all over the front, get rid of your weeds, do that kind of stuff. Or if you think you need a fresh coat of paint, but otherwise, you know, let the new buyer come in and do what they want to do. But those are things that we can easily talk to you about. On the lease, it can be a real issue and it can be a deal killer, kind of like what Rod was just talking about. But another one, I had another one not too long ago too. New buyer was so excited to get this practice, and it was in this perfect area he was so excited about. And when it came down to the last minute, the landlord decided that he was going to take over that space, and that even if he allowed him some space to practice, right next to it was like a convenience store attached to it. And so he wanted to enlarge that, and he wanted to take all the parking for all the customers at the market and for all the big trucks that bring in, you know, all their items. So obviously that didn't work. So that blew up. Do you want to take this one, Rod?
Oh yeah, market the practice. So once we're have the valuation complete and we're ready to go, we go and put a nice marketing package together. It's called a prospectus or a practice offering. We use a third party that does that, and they do a very professional packet. It's about 30 some pages long. Includes the valuation, an executive summary, which gives a really high level view of the practice. There's some pictures of your practice. At the same time, we keep things somewhat confidential. And then there's also demographics of the local area, maybe a little bit of history of the area. So they do a really good job of putting that together for us. And when we market the practice, like I said, we keep it confidential. We don't say Dr. Jones' practice in downtown Yakima is for sale. We might say a general practice available in Yakima, or if there's a lot of dentists in the area, we'll say the city. If not, we'll just say North King County or South Snohomish or Multnomah County, or something generic enough where they can't figure out, either the staff or the patients, that, oh yeah, that's Dr. Smith's practice across the street. And I'm going to solicit information just so I can see what they're doing over there. So we're very covert in that way. And even when we get to buyers, we have them sign a non-disclosure agreement. They're not supposed to talk to anybody about the practice. We have a database of several thousand buyers who are anywhere from ready to go to buy practice today to, hey, if you have a practice in a certain area, we would be interested in purchasing it. So we have a customer relationship management system, a CRM, that when a buyer signs up for our buyer questionnaire. They tell us where they want to buy a practice, so we can do that. We also market in the dental schools, so both OHSU, University of Washington, as well as New York University, Loma Linda, Texas, all across the country. If there's a place where we can put an ad that will attract a buyer, we do that. So, and then when we do get a buyer, we also do a little bit of a background check to make sure that they haven't been in trouble with the state 17 times and had their license suspended or anything like that. So we do a lot of research up front on that. So we talked a little bit about this. So they sign a confidentiality agreement. They are allowed to share information with their advisors, but that's about it. We go over, they get the valuation typically. The initial office visit, as I spoke about before, we like to do that ourselves. The doctor isn't in the office. I've had doctors who I let them show the practice and they tell the buyer that the front desk person stealing from them, the hygienist is on drugs, this is a horrible location, and the practice is going downhill and falling apart. And then I'm just like behind them, just going, oh my God, it's just disaster happening. And so that's why one of the reasons we like to show the practice, as well as we like to point out the opportunities in the practice and the potential, the endos referred out, or, you could bring in implants, you could do this, or if they start complaining about a chair, we could say, yeah, chairs are like $5,000 these days, so they're not expensive. And the other big part, which I think we take some pride in, is we match the buyer and the seller together, both their personality, their skills, just to try to get as close a match as we can. We have several times, in fact, I just did a practice a few years ago where it was a pediatric dentist and found a pediatric buyer, and they so happened that they both played guitar in a band, they both went to the same school, they both were married with 2 kids, and it was just like, wait a minute, are you guys like twins or what's going on? So we try to do that, and it's important because when for the buyer, because you want patient retention, and that's one of the things that happens. And you also, as a seller, your patients and your staff or family, you want to make sure that they're taken care of. So you don't want to sell someone who's totally the opposite of you. So, so we're careful on that. Go ahead, Megan.
Typically, we start with a letter of intent, which just basically is saying, well, what's here, terms and conditions, that it's non-binding, puts it in motion. And it basically is just saying, hey, this person is interested. And so we don't stop marketing your practice, but we can't allow someone else in to look at it and do their due diligence. We don't just stop marketing it. And it is non-binding, but it does start it. A lot of we have a draft agreement of the letter of intent that attorneys have obviously looked at over the years and that work. And so some attorneys are fine for our buyers to use our draft or our template. Others prefer to just start it themselves, and do the whole thing. I don't know, Rod, with escrow money, I don't typically see any every once in a while I'll have a seller that's had a bad experience in the past with trying to sell their practice themselves and have gone through multiple potential buyers and it's been a disaster. And so they'll say, hey, I want, this new buyer to give me some money or I'm not waiting.
It's pretty rare.
I don't see it very often.
Yeah, we did one last year where the buyer is a known tire kicker. He's notorious for making offers and then backing out on deals. And once they've done that 2 or 3, 4 times on us, and we'll say, hey, we know you, and we know that you put them under contract and cause problems. So if you're really serious, you need to put $5,000 earnest money down. So it's rare.
But so first part is the letter of intent. And these are some of the components. It's a fairly small document, and it's not the purchase and sale agreement, but it does lay out some of these items to give you an idea of what's going to happen. And then the purchase and sale agreements take this and run. So are you buying or selling the AR? What's the covenant not to compete? Are there any contingencies? What is the price? Sometimes the allocation of the purchase price is on there. And what that is it just says, here's how much of that total purchase price goes towards the goodwill, which is your reputation and your patients and team. And it'll show the amount that's allocated towards the non-compete and the amount for all the intangible items too, tangible items such as your equipment. And what is that, Rod, at the bottom? Agreement not to what?
Basically not to negotiate. So it means that if another buyer comes along, you can't, start negotiating with another buyer. So you're locked in to negotiate with this buyer.
Right. And really the letter of intent, it isn't binding. It is not binding, but it does really set the ground. So it's also hard to negotiate even after this as well, unless something else comes to light. Then that's different.
Really, we had this working yesterday perfectly. So there it goes.
And a million times.
Yeah. Sorry.
And it's not even Friday the 13th.
No,
and again, I think we've really gone over a lot of this. The buyer and the seller kind of have to have all the same advisors. And again, we have, a lot of those trusted advisors that we can recommend. And you really do have to have two good attorneys on each side for sure to make it go smoothly. And again, we can recommend lenders, accountants, insurance, but they are very, very critical. The insurance piece is you're not going to get a loan unless you have certain insurances in place, such as typically, they're all can be a little bit different, but typically life insurance, disability, malpractice. Some of them even require overhead insurance, and which is what I think that BOE, right? Business overhead.
Yep.
And so, but they'll guide you with that. And again, that's why we're here, is to help you with some of these other trusted advisors and, kind of be, your quarterback that helps you get through all these different pieces. So buyer's due diligence is if the letter of intent is signed and we're moving on to the next step. A buyer's due diligence is when they go back into the office and they look again at the office too. And so some things they might look at is, hey, can I truly sit my rear end down in this chair and use this equipment? Because if they can't, then they need new equipment and they need to talk to their lender about that. We're not ever asking for their Christmas wish list, but if they don't even recognize what the X-ray machine is, or, maybe they're left-handed and the equipment's old enough it can't be switched over, those are things that they need to know. And they're going to look at things potentially, they're going to literally physically in your computer or at the wall, they're going to look at charts. Maybe they're going to look at what do you really do at a new patient appointment? How often are you periocharting? How much of the treatment is incomplete? That type of stuff. So they're going to do their due diligence.
And it can take anywhere from 2 hours to I've had it take 2 days. So it.
I'd say 2 hours is more normal.
Yes. Yeah.
So the purchase and sale agreements are all done based on the outline that we already set up in the letter of intent. And it's drafted by the seller's attorney. And they will work with the seller to go through everything. And yeah, you don't want anything left to the imagination. And I say that even if you're selling to your child or, a nephew or something like that, you want to keep eating Christmas dinner together. So we want everything to be done just as if you didn't know each other. But so the attorney will take care of a lot of this and go through every piece with you. And
this is where it's important to use a dental specific attorney, because you don't want to be paying a non-dental attorney to learn how to draft a purchase and sale agreement for a dental practice. So the dental attorneys have done this hundreds of times before. We have contacts. We probably have half dozen attorneys that specialize in dental practice sales, and they
work well together too. They work well together.
Yeah.
They know how to get the deal done. But yeah, I think we all have a lot of scary stories when you don't use a dental specific, and it's nothing negative about them, but it's just like probably some of you out there don't want to do complete bony third molar extractions either. Doesn't mean you couldn't, but probably it'd be best referred. It's the same thing. They just don't know a lot of the little details that a dental specific would know.
Yeah, it's a quick way to rack up a higher bills when you're a dental attorney. I've seen a bill for $50,000, $50,000 from a non-dental attorney who was helping, and it typically should be. Hopefully, there's no attorneys on the call. It should be $5,000 to $10,000. So.
Yeah, I had one too. The poor buyer was literally in tears. He's like, I can't keep paying for my attorney to redo everything.
Yeah.
And, and I'm like, I can't make the seller do it. I, try to talk to her, but I can't do it. So the purchase and sale agreement, one of the components is going to be, the just transition assistance in general. How's this going to work? Do we write a letter to the patients and that type of thing? The employees are planning on them to stay, and we look at the accounts receivable again, of course, and whether you're buying it or you're not, and that'll all be outlined. The non-compete and that we've talked about, and then also the non-solicitation, that you're not going to go in and try to take patients or your old team members. It might have something in there too about treating family members. And part of that is saying, and part of the non-compete, like some of those together might say, hey, I'm not going to practice dentistry for 10 miles in 2 years, except would it be okay if I treated family members on days that you don't work and I'll pay for the lab? Or maybe even like, can I treat or can I work in my friends' practices up to X weeks per year to cover them if they break a bone or go on vacation? And again, it will outline the allocation of the purchase price that we talked about too, the amount towards goodwill, non-compete, that type of thing, equipment.
Yeah, and the important thing on the allocation is, we try to get as much allocated towards goodwill for the sellers as possible. And it's typically between 80 to 90% of the purchase price will be allocated towards goodwill. And the other is allocated towards the tangibles, the equipment piece of the purchase price. So if it's $1 million, we'll allocate about $850,000 towards goodwill. Reason that's important is because goodwill is taxed at the capital gains rate, which is currently, emphasize currently, between 20 to 24%. And then the other portion, the $300,000 to $150,000 will be allocated towards equipment, which is taxed at the ordinary income rate, which could be 30+%, 33% or so. So that's why that's important, and we really push and negotiate on your behalf to get that allocated that way.
Purchase and sale agreement. Well, again, here's where your accountant and your attorney are going to come in to say, how is your practice being sold? It depends on if you're incorporated or if you're a sole proprietor. Just like that you get paid differently. If you're an S corporation, you get a paycheck that's done through payroll. If you're a sole proprietor, you don't. So there's just differences for that on how the sale is. Is it a sale of personal goodwill, or is it a company sale? Is it what's it called, Rod? The business sale?
Corporate goodwill.
Corporate goodwill, yeah. So the kind of, we've talked a lot about this, is just, it's not part of the purchase and sale agreement, but it is part of all the agreement, is just the piece of the non-compete saying, yeah, for this long and this far, I'm not going to practice. And I'm not going to try to steal patients or employees. But again, kind of what I actually was just talking before, you can put, you can work in whatever you want if the buyer's, okay with it, to just say, hey, I'm not going to see, patients and be paid, but I do want to work at the school, or I want to work at the free clinic. So all those types of things, and family work. And you definitely need, though, to talk about the redo work. If there's, crowns and fillings have to be redone. That's just life. And so you have to work out what that looks like. And, the attorneys kind of have what they think has been known to be fair over the years. And so typically they may start with that, and then you guys kind of negotiate from there. So none of that is, is part of the purchase and sale agreement, but it is a huge piece of the whole practice sale, the documents.
Yeah, and the typical non-compete is 5 years, and 10 miles is pretty common. That can be negotiated. And if you get more rural areas, it can go out longer. It can go 20 miles. It just kind of depends.
Yeah. And if it's downtown Seattle, maybe it's only 1 mile.
Yeah.
So, this one, informing staff and patients. This one can always be, I swear, this is the toughest one for most folks, sellers. You definitely need to have the signed letter of intent, obviously. You definitely want an agreed upon and hopefully signed purchase and sale agreements and all the documents that we've talked about. And it's stressful, I know. But here's the problem. If you tell your patients and your staff early, too soon, then they don't know. And so it's fear of the unknown, like we all hate. And so they're all going to say, oh my gosh, I need to find a new dentist. And the staff is saying, oh my gosh, I got to find a new job. And we can say that, but we know it. We've lived it many, 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 many times. And, you hate to tell them too late so that they're, upset and distrustful, but we'll help guide you, as will the attorney, to just say, hey, you know your staff, your team. If you've worked with the same people for 30 years, let's talk. Maybe this is how and when you're going to do it, versus maybe the average that I have half new teams, half old, half, so your team. And so we take that into consideration, but it's a very critical thing. I've seen some where I even help, the sellers to say, hey, when you do tell them, just say, hey, I know this sounds scary, but I've gotten to know this new buyer and you're going to really like them. And you love your patients and you love the rest of your team. They're not going anywhere. So why wouldn't you give them a shot? But you really just kind of have to keep promoting that everybody's okay. But definitely do not tell patients and staff before we all talk about it and there's a plan in place, and we really kind of want to wait till everything's really a done deal. Or it's because if you lose your staff, you just lost part of your goodwill. So then it's harder to sell. They're going to say, oh my gosh, seriously, you have all temps and you want me to come in and buy it now? So have I said enough scary stuff there, Rod, or do you want to add one?
Yeah, no, that being said, I mean, there's a risk that if you don't tell them that they find out, once the buyer starts submitting their credentials, getting credentialed for insurance and setting up their corporation, then there's a chance that the state or the insurance company will either call the office or start sending information to the office, which is how in the past there's been a few occasions where that's happened. And
yep, mail comes to the office,
yeah,
from the bank or something too, which
yep,
but it just does.
And we try to avert that, but it just doesn't happen. So there's a chance they'll find out.
So as we talked, a letter to the patients, typically you as the seller prepare that letter, but you obviously are working with the buyer to help you with some things to say about them, whether it's what they like to do in their personal time, where they went to school, where they grew up, that type of thing. So typically you kind of write it together, but you're sort of, the seller is the writer, but it's approved by the buyer, and it goes out to all your patients. And sometimes people say, what, all patients? Well, you know, there's no right answer, but maybe let's just say anybody that's been seen in the office in the last 2 years. Is that what you recommend, Rod, or how do you?
Yeah, the buyer, of course, wants every patient known to man the letter gets sent to, but there's a cost involved with that. So usually it's in the past 2 years. And it says here, mail day of practice transition closing. You know, that there's no rush to get the letter out. You know, sometimes the buyer's like, oh, we got to get the letter out as quick as possible. Really not. You know, when you call to confirm patients, you can tell them, the ones that are coming in, that there's going to be a new doctor seeing them at that point in time. I've had letters go out the day of closing, but at the last minute, the bank has some hiccup, and then takes them another week to close. So the letter went out, and all these patients found out. They quickly tried calling in to see the seller, and there was a little bit of chaos going on. So a few days after closing is probably the more best way to do it, the best practice.
So the closing is, you know, a little bit like when you buy and sell your home, except if that's even been a while since you've done that, you know, it can all be typically done electronically. I think, Rod, you do a little more of yours in person. All mine have been electronic, but the company that is doing the closing will also guide you to say, hey, here's the documents are coming to you. You know, here's how you initial and sign them. And so they're definitely helpful. And we just guide you along that whole process too. But there will be a closing date that is on there. And then the next work day potentially is when the new doctor comes in. But all the documents will be signed by all parties. And but yeah, again, they're all snowflakes. I've seen them all completely different. We try to, you know, give you an idea of what the average is, but do you have anything else on the closing piece, Rod?
No, it's just, you know, the transfer of control of the practice is one thing that comes up quite often. We'll close, say, January 26th, we'll all meet for signing. And then from there, it's like, okay, when does the actual collection of the practice occur? And usually we like to give the seller a few days to gather their belongings and, you know, move out of the practice. It kind of depends on the buyer. Some buyers are very cordial and they'll say, no, take your time. We'll, you know, leave it in the office if you'd like. And so it just kind of depends on that. So and then as far as closing, it can be in person, or it can be done by overnight or electronically sometimes even. So it just kind of depends.
Yeah, mine have all been electronically for some reason, but
yeah.
I guess at this piece too, a lot of the questions I get back to, even if we talked about it a lot, is, so the seller will say, so do I stay a week or two and just kind of, you know, help things settle in? No, not usually. I mean, what are you really just going to be, like a hostess, you know, or a host? I mean, there's, you know, and you don't want the patients still talking to you. You want the patients to really bond and grab hold of the new buyer. Now, let's say from a long time ago in the whole situation, you've decided that you are working back and a day a month, you know, that'd be written up in the documents and, you know, an agreement made for compensation. And then that's different. Maybe you do come in and work once a month, but there isn't this 2-week period where you just say goodbye to everybody. It's typically, I feel like in all the ones that I've done over all the years, a clean cut is typically the best way to go.
Yep, I agree. Next slide. Oh.
Yeah, that's yours, Rod.
Yep, win-win for everyone. Yeah, squeeze 2 spaces from the bottom. So why don't we go through the questions that we have here. and make sure we talk about everything. So I'll start from the top. Do I really need a dental specific attorney? I think we talked about that for a bit. Yes, you absolutely do. Don't use your cousin Vinny or your buddy at the country club. Should I update the look of the office prior to the selling? Megan talked about that a little bit. You know, if you have your green shag carpet from 1960, yeah, you probably should replace that along with the orange countertops and then those types of things. I
It
would.
doesn't need to be expensive, but
Right, right.
a new young buyer walks in and isn't frightened.
Yeah, carpet and paint and vinyl countertops or whatever countertops are fairly inexpensive these days. You should not go all out, and if you're selling within a year, put new digital equipment in. Of course, if there's an equipment rep, they would recommend you to replace everything before you sell, but there's no need to do that unless you're, I would say, 3 years or more from selling. We get sellers who buy a new pano like a week before before they're going to put the practice on the market, and then we got to figure out how to talk to the buyer about that. Do we add that purchase price on top of the sales price, or do we tell the seller to go put it in their closet until
try to resell it?
Yep. Let's see. When do I tell my team and patients?
I think I beat that one to death because I know it's such a big deal.
Yeah. Oh, selling your building with your practice. Can you help me with that? Yes, we're all licensed commercial brokers. In fact, I would recommend don't sell your building before you sell the practice. I've had some sellers do that. They think that they can get more money selling it to investor than to someone who's going to buy the practice, which can't be farther from the truth. We've been able to get better values for the buildings because you're selling it to an owner user. There's no higher value to an individual than if you're using the building yourself. And in fact, the way interest rates are right now, the note payment will typically be less than the rent payment. So if you own a building, wait until you sell the practice and sell them together. Typically, every situation is different, but
yes, sell together. That's the best thing, I think. Besides that, you know, if you've gone on to retirement, you might not want to mess with the lease anyway. But also, we've seen some really sad stories where, you know, a seller might say, hey, but I think for my retirement, I just kind of want that monthly coming in. Well, that's great, except for then, you know, the dentist, the new dentist, the buyer finds that down the street is this fantastic, beautiful new place, and they leave you with that building. And man, can I tell you, it's hard to sell empty dental space. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's hard to sell empty dental space.
Yeah, why don't you take this next one, Megan? If I want to slow down before I sell, will hiring an associate to work 1 to 2 days per week while I scale back affect the sales price if production stays the same?
Well, as always, it depends, right? I think when you hire an associate, it's a bigger deal than some people think. And in fact, if you hire the associate, I think you need to find out from the beginning if that associate would be the one that's buying it. You know what I'm saying? I think that's a big difference. Yeah, it could affect the sales price, except for that if you're saying that you're slowing down and the associate's taking over your practice, the way I'm kind of reading it is that maybe there wouldn't be a lot of increase in collections. Now, if you slowed down from 5 days to 4 and the associate works the Friday that you worked and works Saturday, you know, that's going to add some, that's going to impact the sales price. But I guess I don't want to me and my scary stories, but you know, hiring an associate is a big deal. And so that's even something we'd want to work with you on as well. I just see more divorces than get-togethers. And I'm not saying it doesn't work, but it's an important thing. You have to have lots of documents in place with that as well, and stipulations on what exactly is expected and how you're going to compensate. I've had plenty of dentists that call me and say, hey, I went to this seminar and they said the only way you make more money now and when you sell is to get an associate. I got an associate, I've had him 6 months and I'm losing money. So it could impact the sales price if you increase collections and cash flow.
And the main thing we always tell sellers who are a few years out, and we see this quite often, is sellers decide that they're going to slow down 3 years before they sell. They were doing $1 million a year. Now they're doing 700,000 because they slowed down, but they want the value based on $1 million they did 3 years ago. So we always tell doctors, if it has gone down, take a couple of years, because banks look at 2 years of tax returns. Get your production back up to where it was before if you really want to get the highest value for your practice.
Yeah, there's a thing, I think, where I've talked to so many dentists that say, well, but this year I did slow down. I had a few health issues and I took more vacation, but the last 3 years I did $1.3 million. Well, that's fine, but they don't pay you for what it's worth today, for what it was or what it could be. I hear tons of sellers say, but the potential is there. Well, absolutely. And we're going to promote that. We 100% represent you, and we're going to promote that, what they can do, but it doesn't mean you get paid for that piece.
Okay, next question. How will COVID affect the sale of a practice? My practice is in downtown Portland. Perceived fear of the protests and homeless are affecting my practice. The practice did well in 2019 and 20 was down over 60%. How will this affect the sale? That's kind of two questions. COVID is something we were going to talk about, and I'm going to talk about now. As far as the sales price goes and the values go, the way I've been valuing practices, especially in 2020, when there was at least 2 months of required shutdown, and some practices actually shut down for 3 months. We're backing out those 2 or 3 months that the practices were closed, and we're averaging out the 2019 average monthly production and putting those in place of those 3 months or 2 months that were shut down. That gives you a more normalized number. And surprisingly, a lot of the practices that we've been doing values on have increased in 2020 because their production just came back, and the pent-up demand in the practices was huge. The second part of that question, practices in downtown Portland and downtown Seattle, they're not selling very quick right now. I wouldn't say the values are necessarily down, but we're just not getting buyers right now. We have some, and there are some looking at them. They will sell, they're just taking a little longer than normal. In the past, downtown Portland and downtown Seattle would sell pretty quickly. I would say on average, probably about 6 months. Now we're seeing more like 9 to 12 months for the practices sell. It's just taking longer. Anything else on that, Megan?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. Will having a practice in core metropolitan area affect the sale as patients are moving more towards suburban areas? So we talked a little bit about that. Yeah, patients are staying home. That's kind of the problem right now with downtown practices, is there's more employees working from home now, and they're going to the dentist closer to the home than they are to work. So I would say it's affecting the amount of time that it takes to sell a practice. And I know that production is down in downtown practices right now. So it's just a matter of getting an accurate valuation done and finding a group of buyers. So, and like I mentioned, we hit it hard. Patients will eventually come back. It's just going to take some time.
Well, and all that being said, though, too, I have a good friend that's a big real estate agent and does a lot of the condominiums downtown Portland, and they're still selling, so. Yeah,
they are selling. It's just a little bit longer, so.
Well, yeah, but if people are at least buying the condos, somebody's still living down there, so.
Right.
But yeah, it's not ideal, but.
Yeah, do you recommend letting staff know you are considering a transition?
No.
Talked about that. Typical answer is no, but as Megan pointed out earlier, I've had doctors that have had the same staff for 30 years, and they're like, well, I can't not tell Peggy Sue up front because she's been around forever, and she's like family to me, and she'd be really mad if I sold the practice and didn't tell her until the last minute. So there are cases. So consult with us. Do you recommend a selling dentist stay on as an associate if the selling, where'd that question go? Wants to work back part-time? Go ahead, Megan.
Do you recommend a selling dentist stay on as an associate if the selling dentist wants to work part-time? Sure, if it makes sense. I mean, if you guys can make the numbers make sense, absolutely. You know, if the bank's willing to still lend and it makes sense, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, you know, if you're 3 to 5 years away from selling your practice and you're tired of managing staff and tired of dealing with insurance companies and tired of COVID and just tired, you know, maybe something you could consider doing. We call it harvesting your equity, similar to a house where you have hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, of equity in your house, and it's too big for you. If your practice is overbearing and you're just ready just to do dentistry and don't want to manage your practice anymore, why don't you get the equity out of your practice before the practice goes downhill? Sell the practice and either work back in the practice or go work in another practice, go do volunteer or go to work at the one of the clinics, the volunteer clinics, or not the volunteer clinics, but the, you know, CMAR or one of the other clinics. So just enjoy dentistry and just get rid of the headaches. If you choose to do so, I think that's a great strategy. And I know doctors that have done that have been, it's a renewed life in dentistry because that's all they're doing is dentistry. They're not managing staff and those types of things.
So the next one.
Yeah, go ahead, Megan.
If I have an associate 3 years out of school that's worked for me since he graduated and the staff likes, and I own the building, do I really need your services or just a dental specific attorney? It depends. I think there can be several, you know, you can talk about it too, Rod, but I see several different ways. Sometimes the only way to get involved is to do just evaluation, and we're fine to do that. And I think that's important, again, just so that you truly know what the value is and, you know, what they're paying, and that it's written out and documented and it's a done deal. So I think evaluation is important. And again, we're happy to do that. Now, you're right. You might just be able to do it. If you truly use a dental specific attorney, you might be able to do that. But we can also just do even a certain amount of consulting around it too, to kind of help you with answer some of the questions and talk to you about things that maybe you hadn't thought of, so that it does go the way that you want it to go.
Yeah, just to add on to that a little bit, I would say it would be a good idea, like Megan said, to have us do the valuation. You know, I've been doing this for so long. I have story after story I can tell you where we have the situation where the seller's like, oh, the buyer's great. Yeah, we're going to sell it to them. And that's what the seller thinks. And you go talk to the buyer and the buyer's like, I don't want this practice, which may or not be your case, whoever asked the question. But at the same time, you don't know the buyer's credit situation and all the other stories behind the scenes. I had one that took almost 15 months to get done. The seller had hired me to help him out. He had been working in the practice for 3 years and he was going to buy the practice. Super nice guy, great match. They're both perfect. But the buyer had horrible credit. He was in debt, something like $600,000 with school debt. He had another $75,000 in credit card debt. And he had a car and he couldn't get finance. And we finally had to go SBA. And, you know, I made the mistake of charging a flat fee for it. And I probably spent 350 some hours on that. So I think I made $4 an hour putting that deal together. So it was just it was a battle to get done. So, and we'll work with you on our fee on that. If it seems like it's going to be a pretty straightforward deal, we can negotiate on that and come to a decent amount. But I would still recommend someone's there pushing the buyer to the finish line. Otherwise they lose interest and go somewhere else.
It's amazing how many times I've had, you know, dentists that call and they're calling about a specific practice that I have listed. And then all of a sudden it comes up magically that they've been working somewhere for a couple of years. And maybe then, and I'm like, well, so what's happening? Well, they keep saying that I'm going to get to buy it, but I've been here however long now. And he just says I can't. Well, have you talked about it? I'm surprised how many times it's just not, two aren't able to sit down and just say, here's exactly when I'm going to potentially sell it. You have to leave maybe some wiggle room, but you know, the buyer doesn't want to be the bridesmaid forever. They want to know that it's going to be their wedding one day. So there's got to be a lot looked into it, but I'm amazed how many times the associate and the dentist just don't talk. And so things just really never go anywhere. I just see that a lot, which is sad. That's not what you do want to do. So, but that's something certainly we can talk to you offline and look at your real specifics and, you know, kind of give you some guidance.
Next question is 2 years the minimum length one has to own a practice before selling? COVID is taking a toll on me. It's taking a toll on all of us.
Yeah.
There's really no minimum. I've had doctors 3 months later call me and say, hey, my wife just got transferred to Florida and I need to move. Can you help me sell the practice? And you know, it can be done. So there is really no limit. You can sell it. So we just have to have the previous owner's tax returns and those types of things. So that's possible. Then notorious, what % of gross are practices selling for? So
It depends.
Go ahead, Megan.
Yeah, there's just too many other pieces to that puzzle. But I guess depending on what the practice looks like, what the cash flow is, all those other things. What do we want to say, Rod? Like if you're in a small area and it's, you know, an old building, maybe it's going to sell for 50% of collections. Now we have some that have a nice looking practice, great cash flow, accounts receivable, and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, they're selling for 80% or 90% of collections.
Yeah, it depends on a number of factors. I mean, I know people use rule of thumbs all the time, and those always get us in trouble because they think if they're in downtown Seattle or downtown Portland, that automatically means they should get 100% of collections. You know, to be honest, I think I've maybe sold 1 or 2 practices for anywhere near 100% of collections, and that's just the practice sale. Banks will quote that number, but they mean the practice sale plus the accounts receivable. So they just don't tell you that part. But if you have good cash flow, and then the average practice in the United States has about 65% overhead, so you should be taking home about 35%. So if you're around there or better, in a good location, high demand area, you're going to get 85+% of your average of the last 3 years collections, weighted average for the practice. If you're in a remote area, and I'm not going to name a city because I got in trouble one time for naming a city when I said it was a remote city when they just disagreed with me. So, but if you're in the outskirts, it's not a demand area. It may be 65% or 60% of collections. So it just kind of depends. And I hate to give a generic answer like that, but you know, there's a pretty broad range, you know, of where practices sell for.
Well, and it does, I think people forget too, you know, that when we're talking about gross, that's great, except for that, again, with all the practices we've seen and all the financials, you know, we have some that are, you know, collecting, let's say $500,000, but they're only taking 50,000 home. Well, that's not going to sell for 50% even.
Yeah.
So I understand what you're talking about, and we look at that too, you know, the percentage of gross, but there are a lot of other pieces and factors that come into that for us to be able to help you with them.
Well, keep in mind too that while we do set the values, the practice needs to cash flow for bank purposes. So one of the things we do is after we get the value done, we figure out if the practice after debt service will pay the buyer a reasonable salary, which a reasonable salary to a bank is usually about $85,000 a year. So we plug that number in and look at it and say, okay, we have it valued at 90% of collections, but it doesn't cash flow. So we can't find a bank that would finance that. So we have to adjust the price based around that. So it's not a hard and fast rule that like, you know, we don't value it at 100% of collections, and the bank has to be able to finance it as well.
Yeah, and a lot of times sellers think, well, maybe it's just not the right buyer that they'll run to. Well, very rarely they're looking at the cash flow. They're looking if the amount coming from the practice allows them to live and not eat top ramen and pay the practice debt. So
I like top ramen.
Have at it.
What about selling half a practice if I really know the buyer? Yeah, there are models out there where you can sell a portion of your practice this year and then sell another percentage in a couple of years. It has to be a big enough practice to support both the buyer and the seller. So you have to take a look at that, and typically have to be doing close to $1 million or so. But yeah, that is possible. We have done some partnership sales where you sell a partnership to even someone you know or someone you don't know. So you just have to be careful because it is a marriage, and you have to make sure that you get the right person in to work with you.
And lots of things to think about, and lots of documents that need to be in place. And I'll say that in a scary way, it's just that it is an important thing. And again, that's where we're happy to even help you with too, so that you're not one of our sad stories on these kind of calls.
Let's see, I think that's it for the questions. Thanks everyone for attending. Here's our contact information. If you have any questions, or even if you're several years away from selling your practice, we can put you on we have a newsletter where we talk about practice transitions and the current market and those types of things. So if you want to reach out to us, we're also offering valuations right now for $500. So it's a full valuation. So if you want to take advantage of that, let us know. Like I said, even if it's a few years ahead of time, get it done now, and then we can update it later at no charge. So anything else, Megan?
I don't think so, except for that, like we said, every practice is completely different situation. And as you can tell, we love what we do. So don't hesitate to call with questions or thoughts. Happy to just talk through some things with you.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks everyone for attending, and I hope you all have a great weekend. And Megan's from Kansas, so she'll be rooting.
Yeah.
The Chiefs.
Go Chiefs. I'm a homie.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye.